A CEO pushed his maid's head in a cake during her own wedding. Minutes later, he was begging for forgiveness. And it all happened in front of everyone she loved, and the entire internet watching live. What should have been the happiest day of her life turned into a nightmare, as the powerful man she once worked for humiliated her in front of the world. But that was only the beginning, because when the video exploded online, his whole empire started to crumble faster than anyone could believe. And just when she thinks the worst is over, something even more shocking happens. The man who ruined her wedding falls to his knees, begging for mercy. But she doesn't want pity, she wants justice, and she's about to make a deal that flips their entire world upside down. What happens when the woman everyone underestimated suddenly holds the power, and the man who never apologized is forced to face who he really is? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Dawn crept softly through Hannah Brooks's bedroom window, painting her walls in gentle shades of purple and gold. Her alarm hadn't gone off yet, but her eyes opened anyway, heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Today was her wedding day. She lay still for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of her father moving about in the next room. Even at this early hour, Daniel Brooks was already up, likely getting ready with the same careful determination he brought to everything these days. Slipping out of bed, Hannah wrapped herself in her favorite worn robe and padded down the hallway. She found her father exactly where she expected, seated at his small desk, meticulously polishing his dress shoes for the ceremony. "Daddy," she said softly, watching his hands tremble as he worked the cloth over the leather. "You don't have to do that. I could help." Daniel looked up with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Now, baby girl, I may not be as steady as I used to be, but I can still shine my own shoes for my daughter's wedding day." Hannah's throat tightened with emotion as she watched him work. His movements were slower than they used to be, more deliberate. But there was pride in every careful stroke. She remembered how those same hands used to fix everything in their neighborhood, always strong and sure. Though the tremors had taken some of that strength, they hadn't touched his spirit. "How about some breakfast while you work?" she offered, already moving toward their small kitchen. "Toast and coffee?" "You're supposed to be the one getting pampered today," Daniel called after her, but she could hear the smile in his voice. The morning routine felt precious today, extra special because it was the last one they'd share exactly like this. Soon she'd be moving in with Marcus, though they'd found an apartment just 10 minutes away to stay, close to her father. By 7 o'clock, Hannah was at her beloved cafe, stringing up the last of the white paper lanterns she'd chosen for decorations. The morning regulars were already there, having insisted on helping despite her protests. "Child, we've watched you grow up in this place," Mrs. Watson said, carefully arranging flowers on the tables. "You think we'd miss being part of your special day?" The cafe had never looked more beautiful. Soft white fabric draped the windows, twinkling lights wove through the ceiling beams, and flowers brightened every corner. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it was perfect, just like the community that had helped raise her. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus stopped by, looking handsome in his suit, but oddly tense. "Everything okay?" Hannah asked, straightening his tie with gentle hands. "Yeah, of course," he said quickly, too quickly. "Just wedding jitters, you know. The flowers look great." His eyes darted around the room, never quite meeting hers. "I should go finish getting ready. See you soon." Before Hannah could respond, he was gone, leaving her with an unsettled feeling in her stomach. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on the joy radiating from the cafe regulars, who were now arriving in their Sunday best. In the small office she'd converted into a dressing room, Hannah slipped into her wedding dress. It was simple but elegant. Ivory lace over silk, with cap sleeves and a modest sweep train. She'd found it at a consignment shop, and after some careful alterations, it fit like it was made for her. Mrs. Watson helped her with the buttons, tears glimmering in the older woman's eyes. "You look like an angel, honey." The soft notes of "At Last" began playing from the cafe's speakers, their cue to begin. Hannah took one final look in the mirror, smoothing her hands over the lace. This was it. Her father waited outside the office door, ready to walk her down the makeshift aisle between the cafe tables. She stepped out, taking her father's arm, his proud smile making her heart swell. The guests rose from their seats, turning expectantly towards the back of the cafe where she stood. But suddenly, the main doors swung open, letting in a shaft of bright morning light. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Standing in the doorway was Joseph Grant, the man who'd fired her just 6 months ago from his tech company. His tall figure cut a sharp silhouette against the morning sun, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the cafe's humble decorations. Phones and cameras lifted throughout the room as guests recognized the famous CEO. Joseph's face wore what seemed to be an attempt at a smile, though it looked strained and uncertain. He took a step forward, and Hannah felt her feet root to the spot, her father's arm tightening protectively around hers. The music played on, but time seemed to stop as Joseph moved toward her, his presence commanding attention in the small space that had, moments ago, felt so perfectly intimate. Hannah's heart pounded in her chest, memories of their last encounter, his cruel words, her humiliation, flooding back with crushing force. The morning light caught the diamonds on the small tiara Mrs. Watson had insisted on lending her, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls. But Hannah barely noticed them now, frozen mid-step as Joseph Grant, the man who had once dismissed her as replaceable, approached with purpose in his stride, and something unreadable in his eyes. Camera phones continued to click and whir, their sounds mixing with the soft music still playing overhead. The cafe regulars, her faithful extended family, shifted in their seats, some with protective frowns, others with open curiosity. Through it all, Hannah remained still, feeling her father's steady presence beside her, his arm now a lifeline rather than just ceremonial support. The beautiful morning she had planned so carefully, the intimate celebration she had dreamed of, now hung suspended in this unexpected moment. Joseph Grant's footsteps echoed against the hardwood floors as he drew closer, each step marking the distance between what was supposed to be and whatever was about to unfold. The uncomfortable silence stretched as Joseph Grant made his way through the small crowd. His polished shoes clicked against the floor, each step echoing in the now hushed cafe. Phones continued recording, their small red lights blinking like eager witnesses. "Please don't let me interrupt," Joseph said, his voice carrying that familiar smoothness Hannah remembered from corporate meetings. "I just came to offer my blessings to my former—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Employee." Whispers rippled through the gathering. "That's Joseph Grant. The tech billionaire. What's he doing here?" The excitement in their voices made Hannah's stomach twist. She felt her father's grip tighten on her arm. Marcus stood at the altar, his face a mixture of awe and discomfort. His eyes darted between Joseph and the recording phones, then to Hannah, then back to Joseph. He tugged at his collar, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The officiant, a kind-faced woman from their church, cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should pause for a moment," she suggested, though her tone carried uncertainty, "to allow our unexpected guest to share his good wishes." Joseph's smile widened. How thoughtful. He moved toward the cake table where Hannah stood, still frozen in place. The three-tiered wedding cake, decorated with simple white buttercream roses, sat between them like a barrier. "Hannah Brooks," Joseph said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Who would have thought we'd be here today? I remember when you used to clean my penthouse." He chuckled, glancing around as if expecting others to join in. "Always so quiet, always in the background, though you did miss a spot once or twice." The cafe regulars shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Watson's face darkened, and Mr. Peterson, a retired factory worker, gripped his cane tighter. "Sir?" Hannah began, finding her voice at last. "I appreciate you coming, but—" "Oh, come now," Joseph interrupted, his voice taking on what he probably thought was a playful tone. "Let's give these people something entertaining to remember. Something—" His eyes gleamed with what he clearly thought was inspiration. "Something sweet." Before anyone could react, Joseph's hand was on the back of Hannah's head. With surprising force, he pushed her face down into the top tier of the wedding cake. The sound of gasps filled the air as frosting exploded around Hannah's face. Time seemed to stop. The cold sensation of buttercream against her skin felt surreal. Through the frosting, she could hear the chaos erupting around her. Shocked exclamations, the beeping of phones going live with their recordings, scraping chairs as people stood up. Joseph's laugh, awkward and hollow, cut through the commotion. But it died quickly as he realized he was laughing alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah slowly straightened up, white frosting dripping from her face onto her wedding dress. Her hands trembled as she reached for a napkin. Chunks of cake fell from her cheeks, landing with soft plops on the table. The roses she and Mrs. Watson had spent hours perfecting were now crushed and scattered. Through cake-covered eyelashes, she could see Marcus. He stood rooted to his spot near the altar, his face a mask of mortification. As their eyes met, he took one step backward, then another. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The phones kept recording. Red lights continued to blink. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "It's already trending." Another voice murmured, "Poor thing." Joseph's smile had completely vanished now, replaced by a dawning realization that his entertaining moment had backfired spectacularly. He reached for another napkin, perhaps to help, but Mrs. Watson swatted his hand away with surprising speed. The beautiful morning had shattered into something unrecognizable. Hannah's carefully applied makeup mingled with the frosting as she wiped her face, her movements mechanical and slow. Each swipe of the napkin revealed more of the humiliation burning in her eyes. Marcus took another step back, bumping into a chair. The sound seemed to snap him out of his daze, and he looked wildly around the room, as if searching for an escape route. The mortification on his face deepened as more phones turned to capture his reaction. The cafe, which had been filled with joy and anticipation just moments before, now hummed with tension and disbelief. Hannah stood alone at the cake table, surrounded by destroyed tiers of wedding cake, her white dress stained with frosting, while her future husband retreated, and her former employer stood awkwardly beside the mess he'd created. Through it all, the phones kept recording, their lenses capturing every excruciating second of the meltdown, broadcasting Hannah's humiliation to an ever-growing online audience. The quiet buzz of phone notifications suddenly erupted into a cascade of pings and chimes throughout the cafe. The viral moment was spreading like wildfire across social media platforms, each notification marking another 1,000 views of Hannah's humiliation. Mrs. Watson wrapped a protective arm around Hannah's shoulders. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you cleaned up." She shot Joseph a glare that could have curdled milk before guiding Hannah toward the cafe's back room. The small employee bathroom felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos outside. Hannah's hands shook as she dabbed at her face with damp paper towels. In the harsh fluorescent light, Her reflection showed streaks of mascara mixed with buttercream frosting. Her wedding dress, once pristine white, now bore the evidence of Joseph's joke across the bodice. A gentle knock on the door made her jump. "Hannah!" Marcus's voice wavered. "Can we talk?" She opened the door to find her fiancé shifting from foot to foot, his complexion ashen. His bow tie hung loose around his neck, as if he'd been tugging at it nervously. "Marcus?" Her voice cracked on his name. I can't." He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair. "The videos are everywhere, Hannah. My phone won't stop buzzing. My mother just called. She's seeing it on the news." He swallowed hard. "People from work are messaging me." Hannah reached for his hand, but he pulled back. "Marcus, please." "I'm sorry." He took another step backward. I can't do this. Not with everyone watching. Not with all this attention." His eyes darted around like a trapped animal. "I never wanted any of this. I'm not built for public scrutiny." Before Hannah could respond, Marcus turned and practically ran through the kitchen. The back door slammed behind him, the sound echoing through the small space like a gunshot. Outside in the main cafe area, Joseph's phone wouldn't stop ringing. He finally answered it, turning away from the disapproving stares of the wedding guests. "What do you mean, pulling out?" His voice rose sharply. "Over a cake." The board member on the other end wasn't amused. "The clip has over 2 million views already, Joseph. It's being shared with hashtags about workplace harassment and bullying. 3 major investors have called emergency meetings. Our stock is starting to fluctuate." "It was a joke," Joseph protested, but his face had lost its color. "A joke?" The board member's voice dripped with disdain. "You publicly humiliated a former employee at her wedding. The internet is digging up her employment records as we speak. People are asking questions about why she left the company. This could spiral into a PR nightmare." Joseph loosened his tie, feeling sweat break out on his forehead. "I'll fix it. I'll make a statement." "Fix it fast," the board member snapped, "before this costs us more than just our morning stock prices." The cafe's regular customers had formed a protective circle around the back room door, blocking journalists who had already begun to arrive. News traveled fast in small towns, and the viral video had put their quiet cafe on the map. Hannah stood in the back doorway, still in her ruined dress, trying to gather the courage to face what waited outside. Through the kitchen window, she could see reporters setting up cameras in the parking lot. Her quiet, intimate wedding had transformed into a media circus. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped outside, hoping the fresh air would clear her head. Instead, she found herself blinking in the harsh glare of camera lights. "Miss Brooks, how do you feel about Joseph Grant's actions? Were you surprised by your fiancé's departure? Is this related to your previous employment with Grant Technologies?" The questions came rapid fire, microphones thrust toward her face. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, feeling exposed and vulnerable in her stained wedding dress. The simple joy she'd felt that morning seemed like a distant memory now. Joseph watched through the window as Hannah faced the media gauntlet alone. His phone buzzed again. Another board member, no doubt with more bad news about plummeting stock prices and angry investors. But for the first time that day, he wasn't thinking about his company's image or his own reputation. He saw the despair etched on Hannah's face, the way her shoulders curved inward as if trying to make herself smaller. The proud CEO felt something unfamiliar, genuine, crushing guilt. This wasn't about bad press or stock prices anymore. He had hurt someone who had never deserved it. Setting his still buzzing phone on a nearby table, Joseph moved toward the back door. He had to fix this, but not for his board or his investors. The realization hit him with startling clarity. He needed to make this right, because it was the right thing to do. As he stepped outside, Hannah turned at the sound of the door opening. Their eyes met across the small parking lot, and Joseph saw the full weight of what he'd done reflected in her gaze. Slowly, deliberately, he raised both hands in a gesture of surrender and took a step toward her. The cameras swiveled to capture this new development, but for once, Joseph didn't care about the audience. The cameras whirred and clicked as Joseph Grant, CEO of one of the world's largest tech companies, dropped to his knees in the parking lot. His expensive suit collected gravel dust, but he didn't seem to notice. "Hannah, please," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but my company, everything I've built, it's all falling apart because of what I did." The reporters pressed closer, microphones extended like eager fingers. Hannah stood perfectly still, pieces of dried wedding cake still clinging to her hair. Her father Daniel appeared beside her, his weathered hand finding her shoulder. Though his own hands trembled slightly, his stance was protective and firm. "Young man," Daniel's voice carried the weight of years, "you think about your company while my daughter's wedding day lies in ruins?" From the growing crowd of cafe regulars, Mrs. Martinez, who had been coming for morning coffee for 15 years, stepped forward. "Shame on you, Mr. Big Shot CEO. You think you can just waltz in here and destroy someone's special day?" Other community members joined in, their voices rising in a chorus of disapproval. "We've known Hannah since she was a girl. She served us coffee every morning with a smile." "Who do you think you are?" Joseph remained on his knees, his composure crumbling. "The board is meeting in emergency session. Our stock is dropping by the minute. Please, Hannah, just say you forgive me. One word from you could save everything." Hannah's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. "You want me to save your company? Like you saved my wedding?" She gestured to her ruined dress. "You humiliated me then, and you're humiliating yourself now." More news vans pulled into the parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. Phones pinged all around them as notifications flooded in. The video of Joseph's cake incident had gone viral worldwide. 3 million views and counting, someone in the crowd announced. 4 million now, another voice added. Hannah's phone buzzed in her pocket. Despite everything happening around her, she pulled it out. The message was from Marcus. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I can't come back. You're amazing, but I need something simpler, someone who doesn't attract all this drama. You deserve better than me anyway. Take care." The words blurred as tears threatened, but Hannah blinked them away. The message wasn't a surprise. Deep down, she'd known Marcus wasn't coming back the moment he'd walked out. Still, seeing it in writing made it real. Final. Something shifted inside her as she looked at Joseph Grant, still kneeling in the gravel. This man who had once terrified her with his power and position now looked small, desperate, human. His carefully maintained image was crumbling in real time, broadcast to millions. A strange calm settled over Hannah. The betrayal of Marcus's abandonment didn't break her. It strengthened her. She had spent years making herself smaller, trying to avoid attention, trying to be the kind of person who wouldn't attract drama. But none of that had protected her today. "Mr. Grant," she said, her voice clear enough to carry to the gathered cameras. "I won't give you what you want just because you're scared of losing everything. That's not how forgiveness works." Joseph's face fell further, if that was possible. "Please," but Hannah had already turned away. She walked with measured steps toward the cafe entrance, her ruined wedding dress trailing behind her. The crowd parted to let her through, cameras following her movement. At the door, she paused, one hand on the handle. "I have something to say," she announced, not looking back at Joseph. "About Mr. Grant, his company, and what really happened during my employment there, if you'll all follow me inside." The reporters surged forward, their cameras and microphones at the ready. The cafe regulars exchanged knowing looks. They had heard pieces of this story over countless cups of coffee. Joseph scrambled to his feet, his face ash-white. Hannah pushed open the door, the familiar bell chiming above. She had spent years being quiet, being agreeable, trying to make herself acceptable to people like Marcus and Joseph. But not anymore. It was time to speak her truth, and the whole world was ready to listen. Inside the cafe, Hannah stood before the gathered crowd, her shoulders straight despite the weight of her ruined wedding dress. Camera lights bounced off the scattered wedding decorations, creating an almost surreal atmosphere in the usually cozy space. The elderly regulars had positioned themselves protectively around her, while reporters jostled for the best angles. "Mr. Grant," Hannah began, her voice steady and clear, "you want forgiveness? I'll offer you a path to earn it." Joseph nodded eagerly, his designer suit wrinkled from kneeling in the parking lot. "Anything, Hannah. Name it." 30 days, she said. "You'll work for me here at the cafe, doing exactly what I used to do for you. Every task, every job, exactly as I did them." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whistled low and long. "You'll clean toilets," Hannah continued. "Scrub floors, serve coffee. And most importantly, you'll help care for my father, just as I had to balance caring for him while working for you." Joseph's face paled. 30 days. But my company is already in crisis. Mrs. Martinez cut in from her usual corner table. "Thanks to your own foolish behavior, young man." Joseph's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, his expression growing more desperate as he read the message. "The board is threatening an emergency vote to remove me," he admitted, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Then I suggest you decide quickly." Hannah replied calmly. "This offer expires in the next 60 seconds. The cafe fell silent, except for the whir of camera motors and the tapping of reporters on their phones. Joseph looked around the room, his eyes darting between the cameras, his phone, and Hannah's unwavering gaze. "I accept," he said finally, the words coming out in a rush. 30 days, whatever you say. 6 o'clock tomorrow morning." Hannah responded. "Don't be late, and wear something you don't mind getting dirty." She turned to address the gathered crowd. "I'm closing the cafe for the rest of today. Thank you all for coming, but I need some time with my family." The reporters began shouting questions, but the cafe regulars formed a human barrier, shepherding them towards the door. Mrs. Martinez's voice rose above the chaos. "You heard the lady. Out, all of you!" As the crowd dispersed, Hannah's father approached her, holding a small duffel bag. "I brought you a change of clothes, honey," he said softly. "Thought you might want to get out of that dress." Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Daddy." In the cafe's small bathroom, Hannah carefully removed her wedding dress, folding it gently despite the cake stains. She changed into the comfortable jeans and sweater her father had brought, wiping the last traces of wedding makeup from her face. When she emerged, only her father remained in the cafe. He stood by the door, holding her purse and jacket, ready to walk home as they had done countless times before. The familiar sight made her throat tight with emotion. "You're something else, baby girl," he said proudly as they stepped out into the afternoon light. "Standing up to that man like that." Hannah leaned into her father's side as they walked, drawing strength from his presence. "I'm tired of being a victim, Daddy, of letting people like Joseph think they can treat others however they want without consequences. Your mama would be so proud," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She always said you had a lion's heart hiding behind those quiet ways." They walked the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, though Hannah's phone buzzed constantly in her pocket. When she finally checked it at home, She found hundreds of messages of support from strangers who had seen the viral video and her response. "This is amazing. You're my hero. Make him work for that forgiveness." In their modest kitchen, Hannah moved through the familiar routine of preparing dinner, finding comfort in the simple task. She made her father's favorite meatloaf with mashed potatoes, the same meal her mother used to make when either of them had a hard day. "What are you thinking about?" her father asked as she set their plates on the small kitchen table. "About how tomorrow's going to change things," she replied honestly, "for better or worse." Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a supportive message. It was a news alert. Tech CEO Joseph Grant faces possible removal amid wedding cake scandal. Board calls emergency session. Across town, in his luxury penthouse, Joseph Grant sat alone in his home office, his phone ringing endlessly with calls from board members. On his massive television screen, financial news networks dissected his downfall in real time, showing clips of him kneeling in the cafe parking lot on repeat. "This is corporate suicide," one board member shouted through the speakerphone. "Agreeing to be her servant for a month? Have you lost your mind?" "What choice did I have?" Joseph snapped back, loosening his tie. "The stock was in freefall. At least this gives us a path forward." "A path forward?" Another voice scoffed. "You'll be scrubbing toilets on national television." Joseph stared out his floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights below. The same view he'd watched Hannah clean countless times, never once considering her as more than part of the background of his life. Now she held his fate in her hands. His phone buzzed with another message. "Emergency board meeting scheduled for 7 a.m. tomorrow. Attendance mandatory." Joseph typed back quickly. "Can't make it. Starting work at 6 a.m. The responses came fast and furious, but he turned his phone off. He had just over 12 hours until he had to report to the cafe, and he needed to find something suitable to wear for cleaning toilets. Back in her kitchen, Hannah finished washing the dinner dishes, her father dozing in his favorite chair in the living room. Her phone had finally quieted, though the screen still lit up occasionally with new messages of support. She touched her mother's old apron hanging on its hook, the one she would wear tomorrow to train Joseph Grant in the art of honest work. "Well, Mama," she whispered, "tomorrow's going to be interesting." The autumn morning air bit through Joseph Grant's designer suit as he stood outside the cafe at 6:58 in the morning. His eyes were heavy from a sleepless night of emergency board meetings, but he wouldn't dare be late. Not with news vans already parked across the street, their cameras trained on his every move. At exactly 7 o'clock, he climbed the narrow stairs to Hannah's small office above the cafe. The space was barely bigger than his walk-in closet at home, with a desk, filing cabinet, and neat rows of cleaning supplies lining the walls. The contrast to his gleaming corporate headquarters was stark. Hannah sat behind the desk, her face carefully neutral. "Good morning, Mr. Grant." "Good morning, Ms. Brooks," he replied, trying to hide his exhaustion. She stood and retrieved a blue polo shirt with "Brooks Cleaning Service" embroidered on the breast pocket. "Your uniform. The bathroom's down the hall if you'd like to change." Joseph took the shirt, his fingers betraying a slight tremor. In the tiny bathroom, he removed his $1,000 jacket and silk tie, replacing them with the cotton uniform that smelled of industrial laundry detergent. The man in the mirror looked foreign to him, stripped of his usual power suit armor. When he returned, Hannah was assembling cleaning supplies into a caddy. "We'll start with the cafe floors," she said, handing him the heavy bucket. "The morning rush starts in an hour, so we need to work quickly." Joseph followed her downstairs, aware of the cameras clicking through the windows. The cafe chairs were still up on tables from the night before, and the early morning light cast long shadows across the floor. "First, sweep thoroughly," Hannah instructed, demonstrating the proper technique. Then we mop, starting from the back corner and working towards the door. Joseph took the broom, its wooden handle rough against his manicured hands. His first few sweeps were awkward, leaving dirt in uneven piles. "You're missing spots," called out Mr. Jenkins, one of the early bird regulars who had already claimed his usual corner table. "My grandson does a better job, and he's only 8 years old." Heat crept up Joseph's neck as he tried to improve his technique. By the time he finished sweeping, his back ached from the unfamiliar motion. Then came the mopping, which proved even more challenging. "You're using too much water," Mrs. Rodriguez critiqued from her perch at the counter. "Going to have someone slip and sue you, honey." Hannah watched silently, neither helping nor criticizing, as Joseph struggled with the heavy mop. Water sloshed over his expensive leather shoes, and sweat began to dampen his new uniform. The morning rush brought a steady stream of customers, many filming with their phones as the famous CEO bussed tables and carried dirty dishes to the kitchen. His hands turned pruny from washing endless coffee cups and plates, and more than once he nearly dropped a stack of heavy ceramic mugs. "Careful with those," Hannah said quietly. "They're not as replaceable as the things in your penthouse." By noon, Joseph's muscles screamed in protest as he hauled garbage bags to the dumpster behind the cafe. He had never realized how heavy food waste could be, or how many trips it took to clear all the trash cans. The afternoon brought a new challenge, accompanying Hannah to her father's apartment to help with his daily needs. Daniel Brooks sat in his worn armchair, watching with barely concealed amusement as Joseph fumbled with organizing medication boxes. "Each compartment needs to be checked twice," Hannah explained patiently. "A mistake here isn't like a typo in an email. It could be dangerous." Joseph's hands shook slightly as he sorted the various pills, hyper-aware of both his exhaustion and the intimate nature of this task. He wasn't used to being this close to people's real lives, their vulnerabilities, their needs. "You know," Daniel said conversationally, "I used to be able to do all this myself. Hard thing, losing your independence bit by bit." Joseph looked up, catching the older man's eye. For a moment he saw past his own discomfort to recognize the dignity in Daniel's face, the way he held himself with pride despite his limitations. "Yes, sir," Joseph replied softly. "I imagine it is." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of more cleaning tasks, each one revealing Joseph's inexperience with physical labor. By 5 o'clock, when Hannah finally dismissed him, every muscle in his body ached. The drive home to his penthouse felt longer than usual. In the elevator, he caught his reflection in the polished brass doors, his hair disheveled, the borrowed uniform wrinkled and stained, dark circles under his eyes. Inside his immaculate apartment, Joseph didn't even make it to his bedroom. He collapsed onto his Italian leather couch, still wearing the blue polo shirt. His phone buzzed with messages from the board, but he couldn't summon the energy to read them. As exhaustion pulled him toward sleep, one thought pierced through his fog of fatigue. He had to do this all again tomorrow, and he had to be back at the cafe in less than 12 hours. For the first time in years, Joseph Grant fell asleep without checking his email, his body too tired to even reach for his phone. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights twinkled indifferently, while across town, Hannah Brooks prepared tomorrow's task list with methodical care. The next morning arrived with a chill in the air that made Joseph's aching muscles protest even more. He pushed through the cafe door at 6:45, 15 minutes early, wearing the same blue uniform polo from yesterday, now freshly washed and pressed. Hannah looked up from where she was counting the register drawer, her expression neutral. "Good morning. Start by getting the dishwasher ready and loading yesterday's final dishes." Joseph nodded, heading to the kitchen where stacks of plates and cups waited. His hands, tender from yesterday's work, stung as he touched the warm water. He hadn't noticed the blisters forming until he got home last night. "You're holding those plates wrong?" came a voice from behind him. Mrs. Rodriguez had somehow slipped into the kitchen unnoticed. "Stack them by size or you'll chip the edges. These aren't your fancy corporate dinner plates. They have to last." "Yes, ma'am," Joseph replied, carefully reorganizing the dishes. He couldn't help noticing how Mrs. Rodriguez watched him with narrowed eyes, like a teacher monitoring a troublesome student. "You know," she continued, settling onto a kitchen stool, "I've known Hannah since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. That girl has more dignity in her little finger than most people have in their whole body. What you did at her wedding, that shows exactly what's wrong with people who think money makes them better than others." Joseph's cheeks burned as he loaded the dishwasher. "I know. I was wrong. Knowing isn't enough, young man. You have to learn. Really learn." Out front, the morning rush began building. Hannah called him to help with counter service, and Joseph found himself facing a line of customers, many filming with their phones as he struggled with the coffee machine. No, Mr. Jenkins called from his usual spot. "You're grinding those beans too fine. Pay attention. This isn't like ordering your assistant to fetch you coffee. You need to understand how things work." Throughout the morning, Joseph received similar lectures from regular customers. They critiqued his technique, his attitude, even his posture. But mixed with the criticism, he began noticing things. How Hannah moved efficiently between tasks, how she remembered every regular's order, how she subtly adjusted her tone and manner for each person she served. During a quiet moment, while sweeping the sidewalk outside, Joseph gathered his courage. "Hannah, how long have you been running your cleaning business?" She looked up from wiping tables. 5 years. Started it after leaving your company." "And you manage both this and caring for your father?" "Someone has to." Her voice held no self-pity, just statement of fact. "Dad worked hard his whole life helping others. Now it's my turn to help him." "How is he doing?" Joseph asked softly, surprising himself with genuine concern. Hannah studied him for a moment. "His good days are fewer now. The tremors make everything harder. But he hasn't lost his spirit." Throughout the afternoon, Joseph found himself asking more questions, learning about the intricacies of running a small business, the challenges of managing staff, the careful balance of expenses against income. It was so different from his world of board meetings and profit margins. When evening came, Hannah drove home to her father's apartment, her mind turning over the day's events. Daniel sat in his favorite chair, watching as she prepared a simple dinner of chicken and vegetables. "How's our corporate friend doing?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Surprisingly, cooperative," Hannah admitted, stirring the vegetables. "He actually seemed interested today. Asked about the business. About you." Daniel's expression grew serious. "Be careful, baby girl. Men like that, they're used to getting their way. Sometimes they play nice just long enough to get what they want." "I know, Dad." Hannah brought him a plate, carefully arranged so he could manage it despite his tremors. "But something feels different, like he's actually seeing us as people for the first time." "Maybe so," Daniel conceded. "Just don't let your kind heart rush to forgive before the lesson's truly learned." Across town, Joseph sat on the edge of his marble bathroom counter, carefully wrapping bandages around his blistered hands. Each movement reminded him of tasks he'd never considered before: the weight of wet mops, the heat of dishwater, the strain of constantly being on your feet. His phone buzzed continuously with notifications. Unable to resist, he opened social media and began reading comments on videos of him working at the cafe. The internet was full of praise for Hannah's dignity and grace, while condemning his past behavior. People shared stories of their own experiences with entitled bosses, celebrating Hannah for standing up to workplace bullying. Until you've walked in someone else's shoes, you can't judge their journey. One comment read, "This CEO is finally learning what real work feels like." Shame burned in Joseph's chest as he read comment after comment. But mixed with the shame was something new. Determination. Not to salvage his reputation or appease his board, but to truly understand the people he'd looked down on for so long. He looked at his bandaged hands, then at his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him looked tired, humbled, and somehow more real than the polished executive who had walked into that cafe just days ago. Tomorrow would bring more lessons, more aches, more moments of truth. For the first time in his life, Joseph Grant was ready to learn them all. The sun had barely crept over the horizon when Hannah's car pulled up to her first cleaning location of the day. Joseph stood waiting, his borrowed uniform already wrinkled, but at least clean. Dark circles under his eyes hinted at another restless night. "Today we're doing the office route," Hannah explained, handing him cleaning supplies from her trunk. 7 different locations, medical offices, small businesses, law firms. We need to finish before their workday starts. Joseph nodded, following her lead into the first building, a small medical practice. The halls were quiet and dark, their footsteps echoing on the linoleum floors. As they worked, a night security guard walked past, looking straight through them as if they were invisible. "Does that happen often?" Joseph asked softly, watching the guard disappear around the corner. "Being invisible?" Hannah kept mopping, her movements steady and practiced. "Most of the time, people see the cleaning cart, not the person pushing it." They moved through the offices methodically. Joseph struggled with the heavy vacuum cleaner while Hannah efficiently cleaned examination rooms. In each new location, he noticed the same pattern. Security guards or early arrivals barely acknowledging their presence, sometimes walking through freshly mopped areas without a second thought. At their third stop, a law office, Joseph broke the silence while emptying trash bins. "My father was a lawyer," he said, his voice unusually quiet. "Corporate law. He believed showing any weakness meant failure." Hannah paused her work, but didn't respond, letting him continue. "When I was 12, I cried after losing a school debate competition. He made me practice speaking for 6 hours straight, said I needed to learn that emotions were for the weak." Joseph's laugh held no humor. "Guess that lesson stuck pretty well. Sounds lonely." Hannah replied simply, neither pitying nor condemning. They worked through the morning, moving from building to building. In each place, Joseph found himself noticing things he'd never seen before. The way cleaning staff seemed to fade into the background, how people assumed they couldn't understand complex conversations, the physical toll of constant movement. At their 6th location, while scrubbing bathroom tiles, Joseph spoke again. "I have a lot of regrets," he admitted, "not just about the wedding, about everything, the way I treated people, the person I became." Hannah kept working, maintaining her emotional distance even as she listened. "Regret is just the first step," she said finally. "It's what you do after that matters." The morning wore on, their conversations coming in short bursts between tasks. Joseph shared more fragments of his past, the pressure of taking over his father's company, the endless drive for success, the gradual hardening of his heart. Hannah listened without judgment, but also without offering easy absolution. As they finished their final location, Joseph's muscles ached from hours of physical labor. But something else ached too, a growing awareness of how wrong he'd been about so many things. Later that evening, Hannah stood in her father's small kitchen, stirring a pot of homemade soup while Daniel sat at their worn kitchen table. "How did our CEO handle the office route?" Daniel asked, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. Hannah added a pinch of salt to the soup before answering. "He's learning. Shared some things about his father today. Helps explain why he turned out the way he did. Explains, maybe. Daniel said thoughtfully, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. But doesn't excuse. No. Hannah agreed. It doesn't. Across town, Joseph sat in his expansive penthouse kitchen, so different from Hannah's cozy space. Everything around him spoke of wealth. Gleaming appliances, imported marble countertops, designer, everything. Yet tonight, it all felt hollow. He kept thinking about Hannah's quiet strength, how she moved through the world with such grace, despite being overlooked and undervalued. How different it was from his father's harsh lessons about power and control. Reaching for his phone, he set his alarm even earlier for the next day. For the first time in his life, he wanted to do better, not because it would benefit him, but because it was right. His bandaged hand stung as he got ready for bed, but he welcomed the discomfort. Each blister and ache was a reminder of what real work felt like, not the kind done in boardrooms, but the kind that kept the world running, one clean floor at a time. The afternoon sun filtered through the living room windows of Daniel Brooks's modest home, casting warm rectangles of light across the worn carpet. Joseph stood awkwardly in the doorway, still wearing his cleaning uniform, as Hannah guided her father to his favorite armchair. Today you're helping with Dad's physical therapy exercises, Hannah explained, demonstrating the proper way to support Daniel's arm through each movement. Gentle but steady pressure. Let him set the pace. Joseph nodded, his usual corporate confidence nowhere to be seen as he carefully took Hannah's place beside Daniel. His hands, still tender from days of cleaning work, moved with unexpected gentleness. "You've got good instinct, son," Daniel said, his voice warm despite the slight tremor in his movements. "Though I bet this isn't what you pictured doing with your afternoon." "No, sir," Joseph admitted, helping Daniel extend his arm in a careful arc. "But I'm learning that most of my pictures were pretty wrong." As they worked through the exercises, Daniel began sharing stories, his voice steady even when his body wasn't. "You know, back in 1978, I applied for a job as a maintenance supervisor, had all the qualifications, 15 years of experience. The interviewer took one look at me and said they'd already filled the position." He paused, letting Joseph help him with another stretch. "Saw them hire a white boy fresh out of high school 2 days later." Joseph's hands faltered slightly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Wasn't looking for sorry," Daniel replied. "Just sharing some truth. Life's got a way of teaching you what matters if you're willing to learn." They continued the exercises, Daniel sharing more stories between movements. He spoke about raising Hannah alone after her mother passed, about fighting for respect in a world that often denied it, about finding dignity in honest work regardless of how others saw you. "The trick," Daniel said, as Joseph helped him through the final stretches, "is knowing your own worth isn't tied to other people's judgment. Took me years to learn that one." Hannah, who had been quietly preparing tea in the kitchen, brought out 3 steaming mugs and some simple cookies. They gathered around the small kitchen table, sunlight making the worn formica surface glow. "Remember when you first started helping me with these exercises, Hannah?" Daniel asked, his eyes twinkling. "You were so worried about hurting me, you barely moved my arm at all, like I was made of glass." "Dad," Hannah protested, but she was smiling. "Move like a scared turtle," Daniel continued, chuckling. "Took her 3 times as long to do anything." To everyone's surprise, including his own, Joseph laughed. Not the polished chuckle he used in board meetings, but a genuine, unguarded sound. The moment hung in the air, warm and unexpected, as they all realized this was the first real laugh they'd heard from him. Daniel's eyes crinkled with pleasure. "See, Even the big-shot CEO knows a good joke when he hears one. They finished their tea in comfortable silence, the late afternoon light growing soft and golden. When it was time to leave, Joseph helped Daniel back to his armchair with a care that made Hannah's throat tight with unexpected emotion. Later, after dropping Joseph off at the cafe where his day had started, Hannah sat in her parked car for a long moment. She thought about the way Joseph's hands had steadied her father, how his practiced corporate mask had cracked to reveal something raw and real underneath. The man who had ruined her wedding was still there, but alongside him was someone else, someone who could laugh at simple jokes and listen to hard truths without defending himself. That evening, as Hannah helped her father prepare for bed, tucking the blankets around him with practiced care, she caught him smiling. "What?" she asked, adjusting his pillow. "That young man," Daniel said thoughtfully. "He's got a lot to learn, but he's finally starting to listen." Across town, Joseph stood at a bus stop, ignoring the concerned texts from his driver. The night air was cool, and his feet ached from the day's work. He could have called for his car, could have been home in his luxurious penthouse in minutes. Instead, he waited for the bus, then walked the final mile home. Each step on the concrete sidewalk was a choice: discomfort over ease, humility over pride. The moon hung low and bright above the city as Joseph walked, his cleaning uniform still smelling of bleach and lemon disinfectant, his heart lighter than it had been in years despite his weary body. The streetlights cast long shadows as he walked, each one a reminder of the man he'd been and the man he was slowly, painfully learning to become. The cafe buzzed with excitement as volunteers hung streamers and arranged chairs for the community fundraiser. 7 days had passed since Joseph Grant first donned an apron, and today that same apron was dusted with flour from his morning of helping prep pastries. Hannah watched him from across the room, noting how different he looked from the man who had crashed her wedding. His designer suit was replaced by the cafe's uniform shirt, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed from working near the ovens. Most striking was the change in his posture. The arrogant CEO stance had softened into something more human. "Need more napkins at table 3, she called out, testing him. "On it," Joseph responded without hesitation, grabbing a stack and moving through the crowd with practiced care. The fundraiser was raising money for the local senior center's meal delivery program, a cause close to Hannah's heart since many of her cafe regulars depended on it. The usual morning coffee crowd had swelled to include families, local business owners, and community leaders. Mrs. Chen, a regular who had watched Hannah grow up, tugged at Joseph's sleeve as he passed. "Young man, these cookies are too dry." Instead of bristling as he might have a week ago, Joseph nodded respectfully. "I'll let the kitchen know. Would you like something else instead?" Hannah felt a small smile form. A week ago, he wouldn't have known how to handle criticism from anyone, let alone an elderly customer. The afternoon progressed smoothly, with Joseph managing to keep up during the lunch rush despite his still developing service skills. His blisters had begun to callous, and he no longer winced when lifting heavy trays. Small victories, but meaningful ones. As the fundraiser's formal program began, local leaders took turns at the microphone, sharing stories about the community's needs and strengths. Hannah stood near the back, mentally calculating the day's donations when Joseph approached the stage. Her heart skipped. This wasn't part of the plan. The room quieted as Joseph took the microphone, his hands slightly shaky. Gone was the polished public speaker who could charm investors with rehearsed precision. In his place stood a man who looked genuinely nervous. "I wasn't scheduled to speak today," he began, his voice softer than usual. "But I need to say something." He paused, scanning the room until his eyes found Hannah's. "Many of you know me as the man who ruined Hannah Brooks's wedding, The man who thought it was funny to humiliate someone who had only ever shown kindness. The room grew still. Even Mrs. Chen set down her coffee cup. What you might not know is how much I've learned in the past week, about dignity, about real strength. Joseph's voice cracked slightly. Hannah could have destroyed my reputation with a single interview. Instead, she chose to teach me, to show me what true leadership looks like. Hannah felt warmth spread across her cheeks as several patrons turned to smile at her. Every day I watch her treat everyone, from corporate clients to elderly neighbors, with the same respect. She leads by example, never asking anyone to do work she wouldn't do herself. Joseph's hand steadied as he continued. I came here thinking I was doing her a favor by working in her cafe. Instead, she's teaching me lessons I should have learned years ago. The crowd began to nod, several people wiping away tears. So today, as we raise money for our seniors, I want to publicly acknowledge my wrongdoing and express my deepest gratitude to Hannah Brooks. She's showing me what real grace looks like, one day at a time. The applause started slowly, then swelled until it filled the small cafe. Hannah felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes as her regular customers stood up, clapping and cheering. Mrs. Chen grabbed her hand and squeezed it tight. Later, as the last guests departed and the cleanup began, Hannah found herself working alongside Joseph in comfortable silence. The evening air carried the first hint of autumn as they finished storing leftover pastries and wiping down tables. You didn't have to do that, she said finally as they locked up. The speech, I mean. I wanted to, Joseph replied simply. It was true. They walked together toward the bus stop, their footsteps echoing on the quiet street. Streetlights cast long shadows, creating pools of warm light on the sidewalk. Neither spoke for several minutes, but the silence felt different now, less tense, more thoughtful. At the bus stop, Joseph turned to face her. In the gentle glow of the street lamp, he looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. Thank you, he said quietly. For today. For everything. Hannah nodded, surprised to find herself smiling. See you tomorrow morning? 7 a.m. sharp, he confirmed, returning her smile with a genuine one of his own. She watched his bus arrive and depart before walking home, her mind replaying the events of the day. The spring in her step felt new, lighter, hopeful. For the first time since her wedding day, she felt real peace settling in her heart. In her small apartment, Hannah changed into comfortable pajamas and made chamomile tea. She sat by her window, watching the city lights twinkle, while her father's soft snoring drifted from his room. The day's events played through her mind like a gentle movie. Joseph's speech, the community's warm response, their quiet walk to the bus stop. She found herself smiling again, recognizing something new taking root. Trust. Across town, in his penthouse apartment, Joseph lay in his bed, still wearing his flour-dusted uniform. He hadn't bothered changing, too lost in thoughts of the day. The corporate emails on his phone went unopened as he remembered the way the cafe had felt during his speech. Warm, accepting, real. He thought about Hannah's smile at the bus stop, so different from the tears he'd caused at her wedding. Both of them lay awake in their separate homes, miles apart, but connected by the same gentle warmth. Their minds wandered over shared moments, small kindnesses, quiet lessons, gradual changes. As the night deepened, their smiles lingered, soft and genuine, each feeling the first tentative stirrings of something neither had expected. Hope. Hannah's phone buzzed insistently, pulling her from sleep well before her alarm. Squinting at the bright screen, she saw dozens of notifications flooding in, messages, emails, social media alerts. Her stomach tightened as she opened the first one. "How dare you manipulate that poor man for publicity?" read the angry text from an unknown number. Confused, she scrolled through more messages, each one more hostile than the last. Finally, she found a link to a business news website. Her hands trembled as she clicked it. Breaking: Tech CEO Joseph Grant's public penance revealed as PR strategy. Below the glaring headline was a leaked email from Joseph to his board of directors, dated the morning after her ruined wedding. Moving forward with Brooks's 30-day proposal. Market research suggests this will stabilize investor confidence. The publicity should help rebuild our image. We'll update on progress. JG. Hannah read the words 3 times, each time feeling the hurt sink deeper. The warmth she'd felt just yesterday at the community fundraiser turned cold and hollow. All those moments she'd thought were genuine, Joseph's growing humility, his careful attention to her father, his heartfelt speech, had they all been calculated moves to save his company? Her phone kept buzzing. More hate messages poured in. Gold digger. Attention seeker. Using a powerful man for your 15 minutes of fame. Tears burned in her eyes as she got dressed. In the kitchen, her father looked up from his morning coffee, immediately noticing her distress. "Baby girl, what's wrong?" She couldn't bring herself to explain, just handed him her phone. Daniel's face darkened as he read the article. "Now hold on," he said slowly. "This email's from the first day. Maybe things changed. Dad, please." Hannah cut him off, voice breaking. I just can't right now." She grabbed her keys and headed to the cafe early, needing time to compose herself before facing Joseph. The morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the heaviness in her chest. At 6:45, she heard the cafe's bell chime. Joseph walked in wearing his now familiar uniform shirt, looking relaxed, until he saw her face. "Hannah," he asked, smile fading. "What's wrong?" She slid her phone across the counter, the damning email displayed on the screen. Joseph's face drained of color as he read it. "I can explain," he started, but Hannah held up her hand. "Was any of it real?" she asked quietly. "Or was I just part of your market research?" "No, listen, yes, at first it was about damage control, but things changed. I changed." Joseph stepped closer, his voice urgent. "You have to believe me." "I don't have to believe anything," Hannah replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The deal's off, Joseph. You're fired." "Hannah, please, get out." She turned away, unable to look at him anymore. "Just get out." The cafe's regular customers were arriving now, phones in hand, whispering and pointing. Mrs. Chen, usually so warm, watched Joseph with narrowed eyes. Mr. Patterson shook his head disapprovingly. Joseph stood frozen for a moment, then slowly removed his uniform shirt. He placed it carefully on the counter. "I know this looks bad," he said softly, "but everything I said yesterday was true. Everything I learned here was real." Hannah didn't respond, keeping her back turned as she aggressively wiped down the coffee machine. She heard his footsteps retreat, the bell chime again, and then he was gone. Throughout the day, her phone continued buzzing with hateful messages. Some targeted her business directly. "We'll never support a manipulative business owner." "Boycott Brooks Cleaning Services." "Taking advantage of a man's mistake for profit." Each message felt like another small cut. Her regular customers tried to comfort her, but their words couldn't reach past the wall of hurt she'd built around herself. By evening, she was exhausted. She closed the cafe early, unable to bear any more whispers or pitying looks. Daniel was waiting at home with her favorite comfort food, mac and cheese with extra breadcrumbs, but she could barely eat. Maybe he really did change, Daniel suggested gently. "People can surprise you." Hannah pushed her food around the plate. I really thought I was helping him become a better person. Instead, I was just another business strategy." "Baby girl." "I'm not hungry," she interrupted, standing up. I need to finish some paperwork at the office." The night air was heavy with approaching rain as Hannah walked to her small office above the cafe. She buried herself in invoices and schedules, trying to lose herself in mundane tasks. The first drops began to fall as she heard footsteps on the stairs outside her office. Through the frosted glass of her door, she could make out Joseph's familiar silhouette. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it. Raised it again, hesitated. Hannah sat perfectly still, watching his shadow through the glass. The rain fell harder now, but Joseph remained rooted in place, his hand perpetually caught between knocking and retreating. Neither of them moved. Hannah at her desk, Joseph in the rain, each trapped in a moment of hurt, regret, and unspoken words. Joseph's shoes clicked against the polished marble of his company headquarters. The familiar scent of leather and expensive cologne filled the air, but today it made his stomach turn. Security guards who normally snapped to attention barely met his eyes. As he approached the boardroom, his assistant Rachel intercepted him, her face pinched with worry. "Mr. Grant, they're waiting for you. It's not good." Through the glass walls he could see them. 12 board members in impeccable suits, faces stern as stone. Papers spread across the mahogany table like weapons ready for battle. "Thank you, Rachel," he said quietly. For the first time in their 5 years working together, he noticed the gentle concern in her eyes. How had he missed that before? The boardroom door felt heavier than usual. As he entered, no one stood to greet him. Chairman Wilson spoke first, his voice clipped and cold. "Joseph, this situation has become untenable. The leaked email was the final straw. Investors are pulling out in droves. Our stock has dropped 17% since this morning." Joseph remained standing, hands loose at his sides. A month ago he would have fought back with charts and projections and carefully crafted rebuttals. Now, looking at their faces that mirrored who he used to be, he felt nothing but tired. "We've prepared a transition package," Sandra from legal continued, sliding a thick folder across the table. "Full benefits, generous severance, in exchange for a quiet departure." Joseph picked up the folder, but didn't open it. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "I won't be fighting this," he said finally. The board members exchanged surprised glances. "But I won't be quiet either." Before anyone could respond, he turned and walked out. Rachel followed him to his office, tablet ready for instructions. "Call a press conference," he told her. "Right now, in the lobby." "Sir, are you sure that's wise?" He smiled slightly. "No, but it's right." Within 30 minutes, the lobby was packed with reporters. Cameras flashed as Joseph stepped up to the makeshift podium, his tie loosened, no prepared statement in his hands. "I'm resigning as CEO, effective immediately," he began. The crowd erupted with questions, but he held up his hand. "Not because the board asked me to, though they did. I'm resigning because I don't deserve this position anymore." He took a deep breath, thinking of Hannah's quiet dignity, of Daniel's steady wisdom. "I've spent years building wealth while forgetting about worth. What I did to Hannah Brooks wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a reflection of who I'd become. She showed me a better way to live, and I failed to honor that lesson. I deserve these consequences." Across town, Hannah moved through her cleaning route mechanically. The medical officer's familiar tasks, emptying trash bins, wiping down surfaces, vacuuming, carpets, usually brought her peace. Today they felt empty. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications about Joseph's press conference, but she couldn't bring herself to watch. Instead, she focused on the rhythm of work. Spray bottle, wipe, repeat. Spray bottle, wipe, repeat. When she got home that evening, Daniel was watching the news coverage. Joseph's face filled the screen, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. "Baby girl," Daniel called softly. "Come sit with me a minute." Hannah hesitated, then sank into her father's worn armchair. Daniel muted the TV but left the images playing. "You know," he said carefully, "when I first started having trouble with my hands, I was so angry. Couldn't understand why God would take away my ability to work. But that anger? It blinded me to the good things happening around me. Dad, this isn't the same thing, isn't it?" He reached for her hand. Sometimes pain makes us miss the miracle of change happening right in front of us. "The email was from day one," Daniel finished. "But I saw that man these past weeks. Saw how he looked at you when you weren't watching. How he listened to my stories without checking his phone once. How he started taking the bus home instead of calling his driver." Hannah felt tears threatening again. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Believe what you saw with your own eyes, not what some leaked email tells you to think." Meanwhile, Joseph stood in his penthouse, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows, showing the glittering city below. For years, this view had made him feel powerful. Now it just reminded him how far removed he'd been from real life. His phone had finally stopped ringing. No more frantic calls from the board, no more messages from business partners distancing themselves. The silence felt right. He walked through the spacious rooms, really seeing them for the first time. Everything was sleek, modern, expensive, and completely soulless. No family photos, no meaningful mementos, just carefully curated pieces chosen by his interior designer. The bar cart in his study caught his eye. Usually by now, he'd be 3 drinks in, numbing himself to the day's pressures. Instead, he wheeled the cart into his storage room and closed the door. Back in his office, he opened his laptop and began typing. The words came slowly at first, then faster as dawn approached. An open letter regarding Hannah Brooks. In recent weeks, much has been said about Hannah Brooks and her actions following the incident at her wedding. Some have questioned her motives or character. As the person responsible for causing her pain, I need to set the record straight. Hannah Brooks represents everything I had forgotten about humanity. His fingers paused over the keyboard as the sky began lightening outside his window. For the first time in months, his mind felt clear, his purpose certain. He had a lot more to say about the woman who had changed his life, and this time he would get it right. The city stirred to life below as Joseph continued writing, pouring truth onto the page as the sun rose over another day of consequences and, perhaps, redemption. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps of Joseph Grant's corporate headquarters as reporters gathered for what they assumed would be a standard crisis management press conference. Camera crews jostled for position while photographers tested their angles. The air hummed with speculation about Joseph's next move after his dramatic resignation. When Joseph emerged from the building, many didn't recognize him at first. Gone was his trademark tailored suit, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and slacks, clothes more suited to the man who'd spent weeks cleaning floors and serving coffee. His usual confident stride had softened into something more measured, more human. He approached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with his words, a sight no one had ever witnessed from the normally polished CEO. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "I'm here today not to defend my actions or attempt to salvage my career, but to announce something that I hope will create lasting positive change." He pulled out a single sheet of paper, though it seemed more for comfort than necessity. "I'm establishing the Brooks Foundation for Service Worker Dignity, funded entirely by my personal savings, approximately $45 million. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked rapidly. "To be absolutely clear," Joseph continued, "Hannah Brooks, the woman I wronged so terribly, has no connection to this foundation. She didn't know about it until this moment, and she will receive no financial benefit from it. I chose her name because she embodied everything this foundation aims to promote: dignity, resilience, and unwavering integrity in the face of disrespect. His voice grew stronger as he continued. For years, I walked past cleaning staff without seeing them. I treated service workers as beneath my notice. Then Hannah Brooks taught me, through quiet example and uncompromising principles, that true character isn't measured by wealth or status, but by how we treat others. In her modest living room across town, Hannah sat beside her father, watching the live broadcast with wide eyes. Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand. Back at the podium, Joseph's carefully maintained composure began to crack. "I want to speak directly about my failures," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When I crashed Hannah's wedding and humiliated her, I wasn't just being thoughtless. I was expressing years of learned contempt for people I saw as beneath me. The fact that millions watched online didn't make it worse. It just made my cruelty more visible." He paused, collecting himself. The Brooks Foundation will focus on 3 main initiatives. First, providing emergency assistance to service workers facing crisis situations. Second, funding educational opportunities for workers seeking advancement. And third, launching a national campaign to promote respect and fair treatment for service industry employees. In her living room, Hannah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Daniel handed her a tissue without comment. "This foundation isn't about redemption," Joseph continued. "No amount of money can undo what I did. Instead, it's about recognition. Recognition that every person who cleans our offices, serves our food, or cares for our spaces deserves to be treated with fundamental human dignity." His hands gripped the podium tightly. "To the service workers watching this, you deserve better than what our society has given you. Your work matters, your humanity matters, and while I can't undo my past behavior, I can dedicate my remaining resources to fighting for your respect and rights." The reporter's questions came rapid fire. "Mr. Grant, why give away so much of your personal wealth? Is this just an attempt to rebuild your image? Have you spoken to Hannah Brooks since firing you?" Joseph held up his hand. "This isn't about image rehabilitation. It's about doing what's right, however belatedly. As for Hannah Brooks, I haven't attempted to contact her since she rightfully ended our agreement. She deserves her peace." He straightened his shoulders. "What I learned during my brief time working for Hannah was worth more than every dollar I'm giving away. She showed me what real leadership looks like, what real strength looks like. I hope this foundation honors those lessons." As the press conference concluded, social media exploded with clips of Joseph's emotional speech. Brooks Foundation began trending within minutes, alongside comments praising his sincerity and apparent transformation. In her home, Hannah stood up abruptly. "I need some air," she murmured to her father. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. She stepped out onto their small front porch, breathing in the cool evening air. The street was quiet, with only distant traffic sounds breaking the peace. A gentle breeze stirred the potted plants she and her father tended together. Hannah's phone weighed heavily in her pocket. She could feel it there, knowing that with a few taps she could reach out to Joseph. The anger that had burned so hot after the leaked email had transformed into something else, something that felt a lot like compassion. She thought about Joseph's trembling hands the first time he helped her father with his exercises, the way he'd started bringing Daniel's favorite tea without being asked, how he'd stopped checking his phone during conversations, started really listening. The evening air wrapped around her like a gentle embrace as she stood there, caught between past hurt and possible forgiveness. Behind her, through the window, she could hear her father humming as he washed their dinner dishes. Ahead of her stretched the darkening sky, full of stars and possibilities. She didn't reach for her phone. Not yet. But for the first time since the email leak, she felt the weight of anger lifting from her shoulders, replaced by something that felt remarkably like hope. The afternoon sun cast gentle shadows across the cafe's worn wooden floors as Hannah stared at her phone. She had typed and deleted the same message 5 times already. Finally, with trembling fingers, she kept it simple. "Could we meet to talk? The cafe at 3 o'clock?" The response came quickly. "Yes, thank you." Those 3 words held none of Joseph's former corporate polish. No emoji, no flourish, just simple gratitude. At precisely 3 o'clock, Joseph pushed open the cafe door. The bell's familiar chime seemed softer somehow, as if respecting the delicacy of the moment. Hannah noticed immediately how different he looked. Gone were the tailored suits and designer shoes. Instead, he wore faded jeans and a plain blue button-down shirt that had clearly seen better days. His hair wasn't perfectly styled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The cafe was nearly empty. A few regulars sat at their usual spots, pretending not to watch while obviously keeping protective eyes on Hannah. She appreciated their concern, but gave them a small smile to show she was okay. "Thank you for coming," Hannah said softly as Joseph approached her corner table. She had chosen this spot deliberately, away from windows, away from curious eyes. "Thank you for asking me to," he replied, lowering himself into the chair across from her. His movements were careful, almost hesitant, as if he feared taking up too much space. For a moment, they sat in silence. The cafe's familiar sounds washed over them, the gentle hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of spoons against ceramic cups, the murmur of quiet conversations. "I watched the press conference," Hannah began, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. Joseph nodded, his eyes fixed on the table's scratched surface. "I meant every word," he said. "But I should have said it all differently. I should have contacted you first, explained my intentions. It probably seemed like another grand gesture without substance." "It did at first," Hannah admitted. "But then I thought about how you were with my father, how you changed over those days working here. Those things couldn't have been faked." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I owe you an apology too. When that email leaked, I was hurt. But I didn't give you a chance to explain. I just reacted. You had every right to react that way," Joseph said quickly. "That email was awful. Yes, initially I agreed to your terms because my board was breathing down my neck. But something happened during those days, something I wasn't expecting." "What was that?" Hannah asked, though she thought she already knew. "I started to see myself clearly for the first time in years," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "Every morning I spent here, every hour with your father, every interaction with the community. It was like waking up from a long, selfish dream." The afternoon light shifted, painting warm patterns across their table. A regular customer shuffled past, pointedly refilling his coffee cup while keeping an eye on their conversation. "I should have immediately denounced that email when it leaked," Joseph continued. "Should have explained how my motivations had changed. Instead, I froze, caught between my old world and the new perspective you'd shown me." Hannah nodded slowly. "And the wedding day? The cake?" Joseph's face crumpled slightly at the memory. "I was still that other person then, the one who thought everything was a transaction, a performance. I thought I could buy my way into any space, make any moment about me." He shook his head. "I can't take that back, but I can say that I'm deeply, completely sorry. Not just for the humiliation, but for the arrogance that made me think it was okay." "I believe you," Hannah said quietly. "That's what scares me most. I actually believe you've changed." A ghost of a smile touched Joseph's lips. "Scares me too. Everything I thought I knew about success, about worth. It all looks different now." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in thought. The cafe's ancient ceiling fan turned lazily above them, stirring the air. "The foundation," Hannah said finally. "It's a good idea. But you didn't have to name it after me." "Yes, I did," Joseph replied firmly. "You're the reason it exists, not just because of what happened at the wedding, but because you showed me what real dignity looks like, how to lead with compassion instead of authority." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes but blinked them back. "My father always says that true change happens in small moments, not grand gestures." "Your father is a wise man," Joseph said. "Those afternoons helping him with his exercises taught me more than 20 years in corporate boardrooms." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing naturally between them. They discussed misunderstandings and hopes, shared stories about their childhoods, and laughed about Joseph's first attempts at operating the cafe's ancient coffee machine. As the afternoon light began to fade, they both stood, recognizing the natural end of their meeting. Joseph hesitated, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncertain about what came next. Hannah gathered her purse, then looked up at him. The man before her was so different from the one who had crashed her wedding months ago. This Joseph had humility in his eyes and kindness in his bearing. "Would you like to walk me home?" she asked softly. The relief and gratitude that crossed his face made her smile. "Yes," he said simply. "I would like that very much." They walked toward the door together, their steps in natural rhythm, as the cafe's regulars pretended not to beam with approval behind their newspapers and coffee cups. The early evening air held a gentle warmth as Hannah and Joseph stepped out of the cafe together. They walked at an unhurried pace, letting comfortable silence settle between them before Joseph spoke. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do next," he said, hands in his pockets as they strolled down the tree-lined street. "The foundation is just the beginning." Hannah glanced at him curiously. "What are you considering?" "I want to work directly with community organizations," Joseph explained, his voice carrying a new enthusiasm she'd never heard before. Not just writing checks from an office somewhere, but actually being there, helping people face to face. A delivery truck rumbled past them, and they waited for the noise to fade before continuing their conversation. "That's quite a change from running a tech company," Hannah observed, noting how his shoulders seemed more relaxed than she'd ever seen them. Joseph chuckled softly. "It is. But you know what? For the first time in my life, I'm not thinking about quarterly reports or board expectations. I'm thinking about real impact, about making genuine connections." They paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees above them. "What about you?" Joseph asked. "I've noticed how naturally you mentor your new employees. Have you thought about expanding that?" Hannah's eyes lit up. "Actually, yes. I've been dreaming about turning part of the business into a vocational training program." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly animated. "So many people need stable work but don't know where to start. I could teach them not just cleaning skills, but business basics, customer service, everything they'd need to succeed." "That's brilliant," Joseph said sincerely. "You're already doing it informally. Why not make it official?" "The startup costs would be significant," Hannah admitted. "Equipment, training materials, insurance. The foundation could help with that," Joseph offered, then quickly added, "Not as a favor to you, but because it's exactly the kind of initiative we want to support. Everything would go through proper channels, of course." They shared a knowing smile, both appreciating how far they'd come from their previous dynamic. As they walked past small neighborhood gardens and modest homes, their conversation flowed naturally between practical plans and personal reflections. Joseph told her about a community center he'd visited recently, while Hannah shared stories about employees whose lives had changed once they gained stable employment. A child's bicycle bell chimed as they stepped aside to let a young rider pass. They both laughed as the kid called out a polite, "Thank you," while zooming by. I never used to notice these little moments, Joseph reflected. I was always rushing from one meeting to another, head buried in my phone. And now? Now I'm learning to be present, to actually see the world around me. He gestured to their surroundings. Like this neighborhood. I would have dismissed it as unremarkable before, but look at how the evening light hits those windows, how everyone's put their own touch on their front porches. Hannah nodded, pleased by his observation. That's Mrs. Chen's garden there, she pointed out. She grows vegetables for half the block. And that wind chime, Mr. Rodriguez made it from old tools. There's so much life here. They turned onto Hannah's street, where Daniel's modest house sat with its well-tended flower boxes and freshly swept steps. Through the front window, they could see Daniel in his favorite armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he worked on a crossword puzzle. When they reached the front door, Daniel looked up and broke into a warm smile. He set aside his puzzle and made his way to the door, opening it before they could knock. Well, look who's here, Daniel said, his eyes twinkling. Come on in, both of you. I just put the kettle on. Joseph hesitated for just a moment before following Hannah inside. The house was small but immaculately kept, with family photos lining the walls and soft lamplight creating a cozy atmosphere. Perfect timing, Daniel continued, moving carefully towards the kitchen. Joseph, would you mind reaching the tea tin from that top shelf? These old bones aren't as cooperative as they used to be. Of course, Joseph replied, immediately stepping forward to help. He noticed the tin was actually within Daniel's reach, but understood this was Daniel's way of making him feel welcome and useful. As they settled around the kitchen table with steaming cups of tea, Daniel noticed a loose cabinet hinge. Been meaning to fix that, he mentioned casually. Without hesitation, Joseph stood up. I remember where you keep your tools from my time here. Would you like me to take care of it? Daniel's face creased with approval. That would be kind of you, son. Hannah watched as Joseph located the screwdriver and carefully tightened the hinge, taking extra care to ensure it was properly aligned. The simple act spoke volumes about how much he had changed. The former CEO, who once wouldn't deign to carry his own briefcase, now found satisfaction in fixing a cabinet door. They spent another hour sharing tea and conversation, with Daniel telling one of his favorite stories about Hannah's childhood determination to run a restaurant from their backyard. Joseph listened intently, genuinely engaged in every word. As the evening grew later, Joseph stood to leave. Thank you both for the tea, he said sincerely. And the company. You're welcome here any time, Daniel replied, and Hannah could hear the truth in her father's words. Hannah walked Joseph to the door, stepping out onto the porch with him. The street was quiet now, streetlights creating pools of warm light along the sidewalk. Text me when you get home, Hannah found herself saying, surprising them both with her concern. Joseph's smile was gentle. I will. She watched as he walked down the street, his figure growing smaller under the row of streetlights. For the first time since that disastrous wedding day, Hannah felt something settle in her heart, a quiet, steady hope for the future. Not just her own future, but for all the possibilities that lay ahead, for the changes that could ripple out from this unexpected new beginning. She stayed on the porch until Joseph turned the corner, then went back inside to join her father, carrying that hope with her like a warm light in her chest. The morning air held a gentle crispness as Hannah walked toward the cafe, her keys jingling softly in her hand. The early sunlight painted everything in soft gold, making even the weathered brick of the building look warm and welcoming. She was so lost in thought about the previous evening's walk with Joseph that she almost didn't notice him standing by the cafe entrance. There he was, dressed casually in jeans and a simple blue sweater, holding 2 paper coffee cups from the corner shop down the street. His posture was different from the rigid CEO stance he'd once maintained, more relaxed, more human. When he saw her approaching, his face lit up with a smile that held equal parts hope and nervousness. "Good morning," he said softly, extending one of the cups toward her. "I remember you mentioned you like hazelnut creamer." Hannah accepted the cup, touched that he'd remembered such a small detail. "Thank you," she replied, inhaling the familiar aroma. "How long have you been waiting?" "Not long," he assured her, though the slight shiver in his shoulders suggested otherwise. "I wanted to be here before you arrived." She unlocked the cafe door, the bell chiming as they stepped inside. The quiet darkness of the empty space welcomed them, chairs still up on tables from the previous night's cleaning. Hannah flipped on the lights, bringing the cozy interior to life. "Would you like to sit for a minute?" she asked, gesturing to a corner table, the same one where they'd had their heart-to-heart conversation days before. Joseph nodded, following her lead. They settled into their chairs, the morning silence wrapping around them like a comfortable blanket. Through the large front windows, they could see the sky brightening, promising another beautiful day. "I've been thinking," Joseph began, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup, "about everything that's happened, about who I was and who I want to be." Hannah watched him carefully, noting how his expression had softened over these past weeks. The sharp edges of corporate ambition had been replaced by something gentler, more authentic. "I want to rebuild my life," he continued, his voice steady but vulnerable. "Not the way it was before, with the pressure and the pretense. I want to do it slowly, honestly." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "And if you're willing, I'd like to be part of your world, in whatever way you choose to allow." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Hannah felt the weight of them, the sincerity behind them. She thought about their journey from that horrible wedding day, through all the lessons and changes that followed. Without speaking, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they'd done this 100 times before. Joseph's hand was warm against hers, and she could feel a slight tremor in his touch that revealed how meaningful this moment was to him. "I think I'd like that," she said softly, squeezing his hand gently. The morning light streamed through the windows more fully now, casting warm patterns across their joined hands. Outside, the first early bird customers were approaching. Mrs. Chen from the garden down the street, and Mr. Rodriguez with his newspaper tucked under his arm. Hannah stood, still holding Joseph's hand. "Ready to help me open up?" He rose with her, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Always." Together, they began their morning routine. Joseph helped lower the chairs from the tables, while Hannah started the industrial coffee maker. The familiar sounds and smells of the cafe coming to life filled the air, the hiss of steam, the click of cups being arranged, the warm scent of fresh coffee brewing. When Mrs. Chen entered, she paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of them working together. Her face crinkled into a knowing smile. "Good morning, you two," she said warmly, making her way to her usual table. Mr. Rodriguez followed, nodding approvingly as Joseph stepped behind the counter alongside Hannah. "The usual for me," he called out, "but make it two. Joseph needs to try my favorite blend." More regulars began filtering in, each one greeting them with varying degrees of surprise and pleasure. There were knowing looks, gentle smiles, and the occasional whispered comment about how natural they looked together. Joseph moved easily through the space now, no longer the awkward corporate executive learning basic tasks. He anticipated Hannah's movements, handed her things before she asked, and greeted customers by name. When he accidentally bumped into her while reaching for a coffee filter, his hand steadied her with a gentleness that made her heart flutter. The morning rush began in earnest, and they fell into a rhythm together. Hannah called out orders while Joseph worked the espresso machine. They passed each other behind the counter in a practiced dance, their movements synchronized and comfortable. When things got hectic, they communicated with glances and small gestures, understanding each other without words. The cafe hummed with life, the clinking of cups, the murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter from the regulars' table. Sunlight streamed fully through the windows now, highlighting the simple beauty of the moment. Two people who had traveled a long, complicated road to find themselves exactly where they needed to be. As Hannah watched Joseph carefully craft a latte, his brow furrowed in concentration, she realized how far they'd both come. He was no longer the man who had humiliated her on her wedding day, and she was no longer the woman who felt powerless in his presence. They had grown, changed, and learned from each other in ways neither could have predicted. A small spill drew her attention, and Joseph was there immediately with a cloth, cleaning it up without being asked. Their hands brushed as he handed her a fresh cup, and the smile they shared held all the promise of new beginnings. The morning continued, and they worked side by side, not as maid and employer, not as victim and offender, but as equals, as partners, as two people who had chosen to embrace the possibility of something beautiful growing from the ashes of past mistakes. Their movements behind the counter told a story of forgiveness, of healing, and of a love that had grown slowly and steadily, built on a foundation of understanding and genuine change. The soft morning light continued to fill the cafe, touching everything with its gentle warmth, much like the hope that now filled both their hearts, a hope for a future they would build together, one quiet morning at a time. The morning rush gradually subsided, leaving the cafe in a peaceful lull. Hannah watched Joseph wipe down the counter with practiced ease, marveling at how naturally they had fallen into working together. "Want to take a quick break?" she asked, untying her apron. "We've got about 20 minutes before the lunch crowd starts coming in." Joseph nodded, following her outside to the small bench that faced the street. This same spot had witnessed their story's darkest moment, his public humiliation of her, and later his first steps toward redemption. Now it felt different, peaceful. The breeze carried the rich aroma of coffee from the cafe as they sat together, shoulders almost touching. "I start at the foundation next week," Joseph said softly. "We're focusing on providing support services for service workers, everything from legal aid to emergency assistance." Hannah smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've been thinking about my own next steps too. There's a business program at the community college. I want to turn the cleaning company into something bigger, a training center for women who need a fresh start." The gentle tap of a cane announced Daniel's approach. He stood before them, his eyes twinkling with approval at the sight of his daughter sitting comfortably beside Joseph. "Sometimes," Daniel said, his voice warm with wisdom, "healing isn't about one big moment. It's about all the little steps we take together, day by day." As afternoon light began to soften, Joseph stood and extended his hand to Hannah. This gesture wasn't weighted with guilt or desperation like before. It was simply an invitation, a hope for shared tomorrows. Hannah took his hand without hesitation, and together they walked back into the cafes, welcoming warmth, ready to build whatever came next. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.